You don't to become the woman they fear losing by chasing love. You become her by remembering you never had to. The moment you stop begging for what should be offered freely, something in you shifts. You begin to carry yourself differently. You speak slower, softer, but every word lands with more weight. You stop explaining your worth to people who are never listening. You stop overcompensating in spaces where you're always meant to receive. And this grounded, quiet knowing becomes your power. They don't fear losing the woman who pleads. They fear losing the one who knows she never needed to. The woman they can't forget is not the loudest in the room. She's the one who doesn't flinch when someone pulls away, who doesn't reach just to feel wanted. She doesn't raise her voice to prove she is right. She simply leaves when she is no longer valued. Her absence doesn't scream, it echoes, because she knows her love was not disposable, not replaceable, not random. She doesn't chase, not because she's detached, but because she's done betraying herself to be chosen. She doesn't threaten to walk away. She just does. When her peace is no longer sacred, when her softness is mishandled, when the intimacy becomes one-sided, she lets go. And that letting go is what haunts them. Because most people are used to second chances. They're used to women folding back into forgiveness out of fear. But she's not afraid of the silence. Not anymore. She's been alone before. Not lonely, but sovereign. And she would rather sit in that silence than keep shrinking to be loved. She would rather wait alone than settle for a version of love that requires her to abandon her truth. She's not the woman who needs to be seen to feel worthy. She is the woman who sees herself fully, even in the quiet, even when they don't. She used to chase. She used to overextend. She used to confuse intensity with intimacy. But now she listens to her body, to the tightness in her chest, to the way her voice gets smaller when she's not heard, to the way she leaves her own needs at the door to keep the illusion alive. And she's tired, not because she's broken, but because she's finally awake. She no longer craves the kind of love that feels like survival. She wants reciprocity, not resistance. She wants partnership, not performance. And that's what makes her unforgettable. Not her beauty, not her charm, but her groundedness. Her refusal to entertain anything that costs her self-respect. The way she loves deeply, but never desperately. The way she holds space, not to be admired, but because her energy demands presence. They fear losing her not because she plays hard to get, but because she doesn't play at all. She doesn't manipulate. She doesn't perform. She just is. And if you can't hold her depth, she will not wait for you to rise. She will not water herself down to keep the connection. She will disappear the moment her soul starts whispering, "This is not love." And in that stillness, she finds herself again, whole, clear, unapologetically rooted. Because the woman they fear losing never feared being alone. There's a moment in a woman's life when something fundamental shifts, when she no longer sees her presence as currency, when she no longer gives just to be needed, when she no longer entertains attention in exchange for her energy. That moment is quiet. It doesn't look like revenge or rebellion. It looks like a woman coming home to herself. Her eyes grow softer, but sharper. Her smile becomes smaller, but more honest. She speaks less, but what she says lands deeper. She is no longer impressed by charm without consistency. She doesn't melt for half effort wrapped in sweet words. She doesn't chase the rush of being wanted for a moment, because she now craves to be held in depth. Her love is no longer something handed out like comfort. It's sacred, it's earned. It's guarded not by walls, but by awareness. She used to give endlessly, used to pour from her silence, used to confuse overfunctioning with devotion. She thought that if she just gave more, loved harder, stayed softer, they'd finally see her, finally stay. But now, she sees what she gave wasn't received. It was consumed, taken, and often discarded. So she stopped. Not because she's bitter, not because she's closed, but because she's awake. She gives now only where she's nourished. She speaks now only where she's heard. She stays now only where her presence is met with presence. And that shift changes everything. Because when a woman no longer sacrifices herself to feel loved, she becomes magnetic. She no longer clings. She no longer seeks. She simply allows. And those who once took her for granted begin to notice. Her energy is missing. The warmth is gone. The door has closed. And it's not locked with spite, but with clarity. You can't manipulate her with absence anymore. You can't summon her with breadcrumbs. You can't bait her with promises that never reach action. Because her attention is no longer a response to your need, it is a reflection of her alignment. And when she's aligned, she doesn't return to pain just because it's familiar. She doesn't revisit lessons she's already embodied. Her energy is not up for negotiation, not because she's superior, but because she finally understands its value. She remembers the nights she stayed too long, the mornings she woke up depleted, the conversations where she shrank herself to fit inside someone else's idea of who she should be. Never again. They fear losing her because they can no longer access her, because the path back to her is no longer paved with apologies and urgency. It's paved with depth, patience, presence. And most won't make it. Not because they incapable, but because they unwilling to meet her where she is already standing. She's no longer interested in performing for potential. She doesn't need to be the exception. She doesn't need to prove her loyalty. Her energy is rare because she finally stopped offering it to the unready. And the ones who once believed she'd always be there, they feel it now. That void where her light once lived. That space where her love once lingered. That absence where her energy used to wrap around them like safety. And that's the cost of mishandling a woman who knows her worth. She doesn't make a scene. She makes a decision. She no longer fears the parts of herself that once made others uncomfortable. The part that gets angry. The part that says no. The part that walks away mid-sentence when the conversation turns manipulative. She's not trying to be liked anymore. She's not softening her edges so people won't leave. Because she has finally realized that people who leave when you show your truth were never really there to begin with. Her darkness is not destruction. It's depth. It's the place where her boundaries live. It's where her discernment is sharpened. It's where her past pain became the soil that grew her standards. She doesn't perform light anymore. She doesn't pretend to be unaffected, unbothered, untouched. When she's hurt, she says it. When she's betrayed, she feels it. When she's disrespected, she leaves. Not because she is cold, but because she has learned the language of her own nervous system. And now she listens. There were years where she confused suppression with strength, where she kept the peace by breaking herself, where she smiled while bleeding, where she gave more than she had, loved past her capacity, and called that power. But that version of her is gone now. And in her place stands a woman who has sat with her shadows long enough to stop being ashamed of them. That's what makes her dangerous, not in cruelty, but in truth. Because when she says she's done, she means it. Because she's no longer available for the cycles that once hypnotized her. She no longer finds chaos romantic. She no longer associates love with sacrifice. She no longer needs to suffer to feel bonded. They fear losing her because she is no longer movable by guilt, no longer softened by sweet talk without follow-through, no longer persuaded by apologies that carry no behavioral change. She knows what it took to rebuild herself, and she wanted to collapse again just to make someone else feel safe in their mediocrity. She doesn't need to raise her voice. Her boundaries speak for her. She doesn't need to prove she's healed. Her energy tells the story. She doesn't need revenge. Her absence becomes the consequence. And still, she's not hardened. She's soft. But it's a sacred softness, the kind that doesn't bend on command, The kind that doesn't beg to be held. The kind that doesn't stay where it isn't deeply seen. The world taught her that to be loved, she had to be pleasant, passive, predictable. But she's rewritten that script. Now she knows. She is not here to make others comfortable. She's here to be real. And real is raw. Real is layered. Real is not always pretty. The woman who owns her darkness is not the one you use to feel better about yourself. She is the mirror you didn't ask for, the reflection you didn't want to see, but the one that tells the truth. And most people don't fear her rage. They fear her clarity. Because once she sees clearly, she cannot unsee. Once she feels disrespected, she cannot unfeel. Once she reaches her limit, there are no more warnings, no more compromises, no more returns. You either meet her in the depths, or you watch her disappear into them. She doesn't raise the bar to intimidate. She raises it because she finally knows what her soul needs. Her standards aren't a wall meant to keep people out. They're a gate meant to see who's willing to walk through with presence, not performance. She used to lower herself to be easier to love. Used to accommodate dysfunction in the name of compassion. Used to explain her intuition away to avoid being labeled difficult. But not anymore. Now, she watches how you handle the quiet moments, how you respond to the boundaries she doesn't apologize for, how you move when she no longer gives without reciprocity. She watches not to judge, but to know. Are you safe? Are you steady? Are you honest even when it's inconvenient? Because the woman she is now doesn't fall for effort that's inconsistent. She doesn't melt for potential that never matures. She doesn't mistake attention for intention. She no longer builds dreams with someone who hasn't done the work to stand beside her in reality. She's not interested in being someone's lesson, someone's catalyst, someone's temporary muse. She's interested in resonance, in energy that feels clean, in connection that feels real, in love that doesn't cost her peace. They fear losing her not because she's impossible to please, but because she's no longer willing to please at her own expense. Because she no longer explains basic respect. Because she doesn't flinch when someone says she's asking for too much. She knows she's not. She knows what it feels like to live without emotional safety, and she'll never go back. And the truth is, most people are used to being chosen for their performance, for how well they play the role. But she's not looking for a role. She's looking for a man, one who can sit in her storm without trying to fix her. One who doesn't disappear when she stops being easy. One who doesn't need her to be small so he can feel big. Her standards are high because they are based on truth, not fantasy, not hope, not potential, truth. And truth is what she now serves. She doesn't date to distract herself. She doesn't stay out of fear. She doesn't compromise on what matters just to avoid being alone, because she's not afraid of solitude anymore. She's afraid of self-betrayal. She's afraid of the quiet inner death that happens when you keep choosing comfort over consciousness. So now she chooses differently. She waits, not because she's cold, because she's clear. And those who meet her now must be clear too. Clear in their words, in their touch, in their energy. She no longer does maybe. She no longer does almost. She no longer does someday. They fear losing her because once they realize she's no longer accessible through charm or urgency, they also realize they have to rise or fall away. And most fall away, not because she's unlovable, but because she's unrepeatable. Because her love is not just affection, it's transformation. And only the brave survive it. There's a quiet, unshakable power in a woman who knows she's the loss. Not out of pride, not out of ego, but out of embodied truth. She's not waiting for someone to realize her value. She's not hoping they'll wake up one day and regret letting her go. She's not building her life around being remembered. She's building it around never again forgetting herself. She used to wonder if she was too much, too emotional, too sensitive, too intense. Now she knows she wasn't too much. She just offered too much to people who could only hold a fraction of her. She loved with her whole body, her whole nervous system. She showed up when it was hard, stayed when it hurt, believed in people who barely believed in themselves. But when she finally turned that love inward, everything changed. She no longer needs to be proven right. She no longer argues with the disconnect. She no longer tries to earn what should be naturally offered. Because once a woman tastes the peace of alignment, the chaos of almost love becomes unbearable. She stops settling, not because she's hard to please, but because she now knows what it costs her when she makes herself small. They fear losing her because they never imagined she'd actually walk away, because she didn't slam the door or set fire to the bridge. She just stopped trying. She stopped reaching. She stopped sacrificing. And in her silence, they felt what they couldn't hear when she was speaking, that she had already left them emotionally long before she ever physically did. And it is not that she stopped loving. It is that she finally understood love isn't meant to be begged for. It's meant to be mirrored, matched, grown in reciprocity, not in imbalance. And when that's not present, she no longer fights to stay, because she has learned that self-abandonment is the highest price she can pay, and she's done paying it. Now she walks differently, talks differently, moves through the world with a calm certainty. She smiles with softness, but speaks with boundary. She gives with fullness, but only where it's safe. And people notice not because she's louder, but because she's rooted. Her energy doesn't reach anymore. It draws. It invites, and only the sincere can stay. They remember her not because of what she did for them, but because of what they felt in her presence, a reflection of who they could have been if they were ready. She didn't try to fix them. She didn't try to rescue them. She simply held up the mirror and walked away when they couldn't face it. She's the loss they carry quietly, in the late-night thoughts, in the missed birthdays, in the conversations that feel hollow now, because no one else sees them the way she did. No one else stays soft when they get cold. No one else brings warmth without demanding applause. And by the time they realize it, she's already become a different woman, one they can no longer access. Not because she is gone, but because she outgrew the version of herself who would have stayed. She knows she's the loss. Not because she thinks she's better, but because she finally became the woman she was always meant to be. Whole, unavailable for chaos, unapologetically full. The kind of woman who doesn't ask, "Will you keep me?" Because she already knows, if you can't, you are never meant to.